Hello, everybody. We often have co-authors on the show, two people who work together on a book, but on Keen on America, at least, this is the first. We have the author of a book and its subject. My guest today, one of my guests, is Catherine Nixon Cooke, who describes herself as loving remarkable characters and stories that take readers on great adventures. She's a biographer. She's the author of a new book called Dodgers to Damascus, David Lesch's Journey from Baseball to the Middle East. It's a biography of David Lesch, who's a remarkable character. And both Catherine and David are joining us today. So let's begin, Catherine, with you, Catherine Nixon Cooke. As someone, as I said, who loves remarkable characters, what's so remarkable about David Lesch?
Well, he is a dual personality, perhaps more than that, a remarkable Renaissance man. I met him thanks to another book I wrote and another remarkable character who had traveled to Nepal looking for the Yeti and started scientific institutions. I love people with diverse talent. And here came David, the #1 baseball pick for the LA Dodgers when he was just 19 or 20 years old, who reinvented himself to become an amazing conflict resolutionist. And the reasons for that reinvention were so exciting and dramatic. He had me in the first sentence. We were actually there to discuss another book that David ended up writing. And while we were talking, he said, by the way, someday I've got a biography I'd like someone to write. Told me a few things, including a story about being poisoned by Bashar al-Assad. And I said, oh, can I write that book? He had me.
Wow. Yeah, I wish I'd been poisoned by it. Well, I mean, I wish not literally I'd been poisoned, but I wish Bashar al-Assad had tried to poison me and I'd lived to tell the tale. Yeah. So, David Lesch, how does it feel to be a Renaissance man?
Weird. I didn't know I was one until Catherine said so. But now I can brag to my wife, see, I've been a Renaissance man all these years and you just didn't know it. But having my life story in such an accomplished author's hands, he's a wonderful custodian of that story and writes about it beautifully. I remember, you know, I hadn't read the manuscript for about 3 or 4 months purposely, and I read the page proofs. And so I got about as third person away from it as I could. And I was like, wow, this is a really interesting story. And I guess I did have I've had a very unique life.
Did you think it was about you, or did you begin to think she was writing about someone else?
Sometimes about someone else, because, you know, in my own memory, it is my own life. I look back and say, oh, wow, that's right, I did that, you know. She interviewed me, obviously, extensively, and my friends and family, colleagues, and others, and just did a really good job of not only my story, but contextualizing it within the history of the modern Middle East. So the reader not only gets what I hope is an interesting story, biography, but kind of like History 101 of the Middle East.
Yeah, and we'll get to that History 101 from Dodgers to Damascus. But Catherine, first of all, as a writer, as a biographer, do you think it's good to have someone up the road who you're writing about? Sometimes distance helps. Someone may be dead or on the other side of the world. What was your attitude to writing about someone who you knew, who indeed lives in the same town of San Antonio?
That's such an interesting question, because every other biography I have written has been about a dead person. So I had the challenge of...
Yeah, David, you should have been careful on that one.
Well, I tried to help her out.
Yeah, maybe she was being paid by Bashar al-Assad.
But even though we were down the road from each other in town, David, of course, is tremendously busy with his professorship at Trinity University and all the travels he is doing for various diplomatic missions. And I run all kinds of things too. So although we live in the same city, we had never known each other. And it was almost as if we lived in another town in terms of our interviews. And then, of course, I did 50 or more interviews with his friends, colleagues, other people in the field. And those were extraordinary. People all over the world contributed to this book, and their quotes are unbelievable to me and really took me to the Middle East, took me into understanding David. So I feel like in addition to meeting the real living David Lesch here in San Antonio, which was great. Meeting all of these other people by Zoom and in person really added a powerful part to the story.
David, a couple of days ago, we did an interview with Philip Taubman, very distinguished journalist who's just written a biography. Actually, it's co-authored with his brother Bill Taubman, a biography of McNamara, the tragic figure at the heart of the American catastrophe in Vietnam. He, of course, in the book about Robert McNamara, and covers some rather troubling things, like Robert McNamara used to run around Washington, D.C. with a married woman, and various other misdemeanors and immoralities, especially given the history of Vietnam. Were you ever worried, David, that Catherine might uncover something unsavory? I'm not suggesting you run around. I'm not sure if even if you have a wife, whether you run around San Antonio with other married women.
No, I wasn't worried about that at all. I mean, in the interviews, I told everything. I mean, all the good, the bad.
Everything?
Everything.
No secrets? I hope you have one or two you kept up your sleeve.
Well, yeah, those are personal. But even some of the ugly. In fact, one of my most embarrassing moments in my life, I told her, and I told her because she needs the full picture, and unfortunately, she put it in the book. But I think it paints, that in my youth, I did some stupid stuff, and all of that's part of the mosaic. And
who doesn't?
That's your life. Yeah.
So Catherine, the book is called Dodgers to Damascus, David Lesch's journey from baseball to the Middle East. We're not going to ask him to tell his story. We're going to ask you, because you're his biographer. So let's begin with the Dodgers. What was so interesting about his experience in baseball?
Well, we had the most wonderful review the other day from a man that writes for a baseball publication. Just saw it yesterday for the book. And I can't tell you how much it meant to me, because he recognized the fact that throughout the whole book, we weave the baseball subject into David's progression through life and how baseball prepared him. Famous historian Doris Kearns Goodwin also talks about baseball and how it really does make a perfect historian, because you never know how it's going to end until the end of the game. So I loved inserting the baseball, but those early days where David pictured himself becoming a fabulous baseball star, which he would have, #1 pick with the Dodgers, until a shoulder injury waylaid him before the days of shoulder surgery. So that resilience, actually, that when he was accepted to Harvard, all of the people that interviewed him, a person with slightly lower grades than some of the others applying for the same spot, said it was that resilience. It was the way he had handled those early baseball years that prepared him. And of course, it prepared him for so many other things that are reported in the book. So I love the way that theme runs through the whole book.
David, as Catherine said, you were the #1 pick for the Dodgers. I'm in San Francisco, so not my favorite team, but I can't choose everything in 1980. That's a very, very big deal. There are tens of thousands of young men who would like to have been the #1 draft pick. You hurt your shoulder. You were a pitcher, right?
Correct.
Do you think, I know this is easy in retrospect and maybe a little cute, but do you think in a way you got lucky with that shoulder injury?
Well, yeah, in retrospect, I think so. I mean, sure, if I made it to the major leagues and had a wonderful career, or maybe I'd be a baseball announcer now, that would have been a very, very different life. But I've had such a fulfilling life in academia and in diplomacy and conflict resolution, where I really think I touch many more lives in a much different way. I'm not going to say more important way, but a much different way than I would have through baseball. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to pivot. And there was some luck involved. There was wonderful mentors involved, and a lot of hard work. And I was able to carve out a successful career. And so I really don't look back with any regret at all.
Catherine mentioned Doris Kearns Goodwin, one of America's great writers and biographers, and her love affair with baseball. Many other Americans have similar love affairs, especially with literary Americans. What was it about baseball that that attracted you as a young man, as a pitcher? Is there something particularly American about it, do you think, as a sport, as an activity? David?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, in fact, I taught a course years ago called The History of Baseball in American Society. And basically, it's looking at American history through the prism of baseball, because a lot of what happened in the United States regarding segregation and desegregation, regarding civil rights, regarding capitalism and the growth of capitalism, all of these things are reflected in the history of baseball.
And of course, the Dodgers broke the color barrier more than any other team. So the
exactly
history of baseball and Jackie Robinson and Dodgers all go together.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in essence, the two go together, and baseball is part of the fabric of American history. It's not the most popular sport anymore, but it's still, I think, the most historical.
Well, you always you're obviously a rather thoughtful fellow now. You're a modern Renaissance man. We'll talk about what you did after you did in your shoulder. But were you always as thoughtful as a young man? When you think of kids coming up and becoming the number one draft pick for a Major League Baseball team, one thinks of rather single-minded young men who wake up in the morning and go to bed at night thinking only about one thing, of how to throw a baseball.
It's a great question. And it took me a while after my sporting and athletics career to figure out that, oh, wow, I have a pretty good mind. Maybe I can do this and maybe I can do that. And I was probably insecure about it at first, especially when I went to Harvard University, because I didn't have that typical.
Wait, is that a good university? I've never heard of that one.
Do I keep bringing it up?
But where'd you go to university, David?
This place up in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yeah, is that the one that they're trying to shut down?
Yeah, I think so, among many others. But so I was a little insecure when I went there, and it took me a little while to get over that idea that I was a jock, growing up. But I was always known as the thinking man's pitcher. And that's one of the things about baseball. You really do have to think ahead. And so, I guess that's one of the attributes that baseball helped with.
Who was your great hero growing up as a pitcher?
Jim Palmer of the Baltimore Orioles. I grew up in Baltimore, so he was my hero, 3-time Cy Young Award winner. And I tried to model my pitching motion after him, and he did it much better. So
yeah, well, you can blame. You should have sued him when you hurt your shoulder, Catherine.
Exactly. I should have become a side armor. That would have been much less pressure on my shoulder.
Right, yeah. Catherine, as a writer, that's a tough business. I'm not sure I would advise either of my kids to be either writers or baseball pitchers. They're both very tough professions. What did David's reinvention teach you? I know that David's life is a teachable life, but what in particular did it teach you? Maybe you've had some setbacks in your life as a writer. Maybe you set out in your life to do something else.
That's a great question. And I think really an underlying theme of the whole book for every reader, not just me, the writer, but every reader, is that things come along in our life that are challenges that change where we think we're going. And what we do with those, how we pivot, how we find the other road, is really important. And David's life gives us a great example, but it's an inspiration that we can really all do that. And I wish I ask David to quote the exact statistic. I've forgotten it, but we put it in the book. Another thing about sports is the percentage of times you do not win. And that was so interesting to me. I like to win. I like to have something succeed and win. But if you would tell us that, the quote is in there, it's such a small percentage that it prepares you for these challenges and changes in life that we all encounter.
Yeah, it's I'm jumping in here. It's the famous phrase about baseball is a great, I mean, it's more of a hitting statistic than a pitching statistic. If you hit 300, in other words, if you get on base 3 out of 10 times, then you're an extremely good player, David.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, failure is at the core of sport, and
particularly baseball, I think.
Particularly baseball, particularly as a hitter, but as a pitcher too. You know, you give a home run up one inning, or one game you give up the winning home run in the bottom of the ninth. The next game you get past that, and you're the winning pitcher. And so you have to learn to adapt to failure, learn how to come back from that. And I remember, students who come into my office, they say, Dr. Lesch, I want to do what you do. And I ask them, how many times have you failed? And many of these are really top students, and they'll tell me, well, none. And I say, well, come back to me when you failed about 10, 12 times. And then you'll really learn about life and be ready to take the next steps in terms of your career. And, so that's where athletics and sports, I think, really helped me. And in Middle East diplomacy, you fail all the time, lots of times with things out of your control. So you have to be able to get past that. You have to have
I'm not sure that Henry Kissinger was one of the great diplomats, but not even he batted 300. He batted about 100, and he probably batted better than most. It's interesting. I did a show a few days ago with the New York Times writer Matt Richtel. He's written a book about adolescence in America and parenting in America and this crisis of anxiety. He said to me that as a parent, we both have similarly aged kids. We've known each other a while. That if you can bat 300 as a parent, then you've done really well, which I think is right. But then as a parent, you can only think of the 7 times you struck out or didn't get on base. So it is hard. I mean, this idea of, I always feel this, it's a little bit of an American thing, particularly a Silicon Valley thing. This fetishization of failure is peculiarly American, and it's particularly common with people who have succeeded. In other words, it's all very well celebrating failure when you've won out. I doubt, David, that you would have been as eager to embrace your own failure immediately after you got your shoulder injury.
Yes, I think you're right, because one of the things with and I was a baseball coach for my son and coached other kids, and this one debate with youth athletics is, does everybody get a trophy for participation? And therefore, everyone has this feeling of success, or do only the first and only the champions get the trophies? Therefore, valuing success more. And again, from my vantage point, looking backward, I tend to favor the latter. That people and young kids need to understand how to succeed, and that there are benefits to that. But I do understand as well, and I was on losing teams with my son, and so I appreciate everyone getting a participation trophy. I didn't necessarily wasn't for it, but there is that debate, and I wouldn't call it a fetish of I can't even say that, fetishization. There we go, of failure. I think it's a fetishization of success, and that's what defines Americans. And those people that aren't successful in most people's eyes. I mean, success is in the eye of the beholder. And if you are happy, it's like Denmark and Norway are the happiest countries in the world, but they're not the most powerful. They're not the most economically wealthy, but they're happy. So what is happy? What is success? And it's everyone's own interpretation of that. And, for me, my life experiences early on helped prepare me for the next set of life experiences.
And I think most Americans who would end up in Denmark or Norway wouldn't be particularly happy with the Danish or Norwegian versions of happiness. I think it's not as much fun there as it is here. Catherine, so you're the biographer, so tell David's story. So he got this terrible shoulder injury. Did he go to Harvard after that or before that? How did it all work out?
He did go to Harvard after the shoulder injury, after first being one of the very first to go to the opening of Disney World in Orlando, Florida, just when he had learned his terrible news of shoulder injury, no more baseball player, and went to Tomorrowland with his then girlfriend and realized that indeed there was a tomorrow, began to look at what he would do next, went to Harvard, eventually got a PhD there.
Isn't that, sorry to jump in, isn't that a bit cheesy that he heard about his shoulder injury in Disneyland, in Tomorrowland, and then he decided he was going to go to Harvard and he reinvents himself? It must have been a bit more complicated than that.
Of course, more complicated, but it is a wonderful, happy story that someone that's just had this injury, certainly is disappointed when he's told that he's being cut from the team, decides, I happen to love Disneyland and Disney World, so maybe I resonate with that. And remember, it is the happiest place on earth. That having just heard this terrible news.
Well, you haven't been to Norway or Denmark, have you?
I have. I prefer Disney.
No, I'm teasing you. Go on.
But I believe it again speaks to that resilience. And when we were talking about failure, one of his mottos of, it's outcome. So he's looking at the outcome of what has just occurred. Not a happy outcome, but instead of moping, going home sadly to his parents, he did go first to this new opening of, and you're probably too young to remember that these things like Tomorrowland and—
I'm very young. Don't I look young to you, Catherine?
You do. Yes, you do. Anyway, and you've already said you have little children. So I
yeah, well, they're not so little anymore. So David, tell me about your background. Were you from I'm careful with this word, but it's one that my daughter always uses. Were you from a privileged family? I mean, clearly a very supportive family. You must have done exceptionally well as a student athlete, and then you got into Harvard as well. Do you feel lucky? Were you given all the best chances in the world, or did you have to make them yourself?
A combination of both. I mean, I had great parents. My dad was a family physician, a small town doctor who was, I think, one of the last generation who went on house calls. And my mom was a homemaker, but a very devout Catholic. And I had a great brother, older brother, who I learned from and who kept me tough by beating me up all the time. But it was really good. I did a podcast a couple days ago, and this the interviewer was from Iraq, and he goes, from a Middle Eastern background, I look at your life, David, and you like the all-American boy. You had this, that, and the other thing, and I can't say no to that. I did, and I had opportunity. I had supportive parents, and so I can't say I was from a destitute background or a broken family or any of those things, but the challenges in my life would come, and they'd come very fast and furious after a very good upbringing.
So did you have to go back to school, or did you just pick up the phone and call Harvard and say, I've hurt my shoulder, I'm not going to go to the Dodgers, so I think I'm going to come up to Cambridge? Yeah,
no, I went to first finished off I was in baseball, like right in between freshman or I guess they call it first year now and sophomore year. I went back to college, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, got my BA there, had wonderful mentors and professors, and applied to the Middle East program at Harvard University. And,
undergraduate or graduate school?
Graduate school. I got an MA and a PhD. And as Catherine said, another one of my mottos was never eliminate yourself. I really wasn't planning to apply to Harvard. In fact, I filled out the application in handwritten, ink rather than typing, because I really didn't think I would get in, but I did. And I learned a very important lesson, never eliminate yourself. Just put
it's the old Woody, and not that Woody Allen is very good at advertisement for anything these days, but it's, what is it, 80 or 90% of life is showing up.
Yeah, exactly.
Catherine, we're going to get onto the Middle East in a second, but even if David had just gone to Harvard and become an accountant or a lawyer or a local government official or a doctor, it's already a bit of a journey, isn't it?
I think so. I think that first half before the Middle East adventure, which you're about to unfold for us, happened, is in itself a remarkable story. And then the second half, underway right now, of what happened next is an even greater adventure. And the many, many people that I interviewed, famous people that are doing all kinds of international diplomatic work, what they have said about David's work and how he listens and the value of listening, which I know you'll get into in a minute, or we can, is to me the other part of the story, whether you're talking about the Middle East and all of the conflicts in that region, or whether you're talking about what your family is going to do when they are trying to decide on their vacation. I think William Ury, one of the people who participated in a big way in the book, who wrote Getting to Yes, talks about that power of listening. And David certainly has mastered that. And I think it's a huge message in the book.
David, how did you find the Middle East, or the Middle East found you? You said you were an undergraduate in Baltimore. When did you discover the Middle East? I'm assuming you didn't grow up in an Arab family. You didn't speak Arabic as a young man. What was it about the Middle East that fascinated you so much to go to grad school at Harvard?
Well, I was in undergrad at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I was always interested in international relations. And this was, 1981, 82, 83, that period. And as usual, there was lots of stuff going on in the Middle East. You had the Iran-Iraq War, you had the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, the aftermath of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So my radar naturally kind of just veered toward the Middle East. And those two wonderful professors I mentioned earlier were well known, and they happened to be at the University of Maryland at the time, steered me in that direction, excited my interest in the history of the Middle East. And then, of course, when I got my BA, I realized that I needed a few more degrees to be job worthy. And so that's when I started applying to Middle East programs.
So, had you spent any time in the Middle East?
Nope, not until summer of 1984, which was after I got my BA, and the summer before I first went to grad school. I spent the summer in Egypt, and that was eye-opening. And that was my first time in a Middle East country.
Catherine, what is it about the Middle East that again makes this? The cover of it has a wonderfully Arabian cover to the book. Maybe we should rename David David of Arabia rather than Lawrence of Arabia. What is it about the Middle East that adds so much color, romance, intrigue, perhaps even controversy to this journey? From an American point of view, given America's, I don't know whether you call it a love-hate relationship with the Middle East, certainly a very difficult relationship in the 20th century.
Well, I think the ancient complexity of it is romantic to all of us. I forget which of the great writers called it the Garden of Eden, the place where civilization...
I think that was God, wasn't it?
I thought it might be Oscar Wilde. I'm not quite sure. But
whoever wrote the Bible called it that.
Right. And so, of course, there's the intrigue. And when David first asked me to write the book, I recognized, or I believe, that there's so many very well-educated people. We all have big degrees. We think we know a lot, but the Middle East remains a mystery to us. And I think that this was also an opportunity through David's story to take a look at, as he said, Middle East 101, and go back and talk about some of the ancient history and what had happened there, and recognizing that it's an area that most Westerners anyway do not understand. So it was a great gift to me. I learned a huge amount from David and from these 50 or so people working in the Middle East. So it's a journey to the Middle East while it's David's story. And I hope, my biggest hope, is that when you read it, it is not a dull academic journey through the Middle East where your eyes roll when it gets a little complicated, and instead it's quite an adventure, taking you into parts that you wouldn't imagine.
Yeah, and of course the title brings to mind Thomas Friedman's bestseller, From Beirut to Jerusalem. It's a different kind of journey. David, I know some of my friends have followed your path, not on the baseball front, but on the Middle Eastern studies front. And they tended to have got involved in the first place because of one kind of moral concern, often outrage or other. I mean, we'll talk about Bashar al-Assad, member of one of the more bloodthirsty clans in the Middle East. There's, of course, the Arab-Israeli conflict, the failure of democracy in the Middle East, the Iranian question, and so on and so forth. Was there a particular event or subject in the Middle East that outraged you, that perhaps, or upset you, that brought you into this? You thought, oh, I want to fix this. I want to address something that's just so terrible.
Well, there's one of the books I wrote, published in 2000, is called 1979, the year that shaped the modern Middle East. And it was particularly important to me because it focuses on the seminal events of that year, the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, the Iranian Revolution, the taking of the Grand Mosque in Saudi Arabia, and of course the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan later in the year. And it's those events that kind of just brought me to the Middle East and all the complexities, and the U.S. trying to figure out how to navigate all this. And that's probably what interested me the most, not only the history of the region itself, but how the U.S., can I do something, can I learn something to help U.S. foreign policy, either through writings or consultations or whatever, have a more cogent and far-sighted foreign policy in the Middle East.
Yeah, I'm coming back to the baseball metaphor of only batting 300. How was America batted, shall we say, in the first?
That's a great question. I had an amazing debate in my class last year because I asked that very same question, a little bit different way. You know, give the U.S. a grade, and most said F, D, C, and I said, well, in terms of the stated objectives of the U.S. over the years, safe transport of, easy access to oil at reasonable prices, maintaining Israel as a friend and its safety, and keeping the Soviets out. If you look at it in those three main objectives, and now keeping Russia out, what do you think? And they said, well, an A or B at worst. And we did it with relatively few casualties compared to many other wars. And so this garnered a great debate in class, and people
imagine, yeah, very controversial position. Catherine, having written this book, researched a lot of David's experiences in the Middle East as a UN and a State Department advisor. What did his Middle Eastern chapters in the book teach you about the Middle East that you didn't already know? I mean, you're not a Middle Eastern person, but did it help clarify the complexity of the situation? Often when you ask Americans, or in fact anyone in the world, about the Middle East, they'll shake their head and say, I just don't understand it. It's way too complicated. The difference between Shia and Sunni, difference between Iraq and Syria and Jordan, the Arab-Israeli conflict, the difference between the Iranians and the Arabs, and so on and so forth. What did writing this book teach you about the Middle East?
Well, you're so right about everything you said, and I think I'm the perfect example of the reader I'm hoping to attract. Stanford, in fact, Philip Taubman and Felicity were my classmates there, your former guests.
Oh, wow. So you know those guys very well.
I do. And so I like to think that I'm well educated. I've taken history classes, etc. And I'm the first to admit that I was very, very ignorant of the complexities that you're talking about. So David taught me a tremendous amount. I read all of his books. There's 17 of them, by the way, about the Middle East. And
you need to, David, you need to do a little bit more with your life. You seem a very lazy kind of fellow.
I'm trying. I'm having other people write about me now. I'm not doing anything.
And then speaking with Middle Eastern diplomats, people from the Middle East who are diplomats there, ambassadors who've been former ambassador to Lebanon, the new information that came to me that I'd never thought of, never heard of, astounded me. And I would say to my husband and others, you won't believe what I learned today. I felt like I was a new student, thanks to David, thanks to these many people I spoke to. And it was one of my great hopes that this book would bring that same, just the opening of a door, just a crack open more than what we've seen before. And I think we did that, David.
David, I do quite a lot of shows on the Middle East, although sometimes it makes me a little nervous because it seems very hard to persuade people, especially on the Arab-Israeli conflict, especially these days. What do you think Americans most misunderstand about the Middle East? You've spent your post-baseball life dedicated to understanding it, to teaching it, to being involved in peace there. What is it that Americans don't get?
Americans tend to take a telescopic view toward the Middle East rather than a microscopic view. They get it through clips on the news or conversations or news media where it's 5 minutes long or something like that. And it's often very, very negative, of course. And I think one of the things when I bring students over the Middle East, when I bring business people over the Middle East from the United States, the one thing they all come back with is, hey, these guys aren't that much different than us. Yeah, on the surface, they may practice a different religion. They may, believe in this, that, the other thing. But at the heart, their interest, when you drill down behind, below the surface, is that they just want a good life. They want a good living. They want their family to be safe. And so there's that connection that is made. And so if Americans take the opportunity to actually travel to some of these areas and really read the books by Middle East authors, by experts or so-called experts like myself and so forth, then they can get more of a microscopic view of the region rather than that 10,000-foot view.
That sounds very reasonable, but and I'm sure in some ways it's true, but even a microscopic view of, say, the Arab-Israeli conflict or what's happening in Gaza today or some of the other conflicts don't result in resolution, do they?
No, but understanding, and you can't even begin to resolve it or put pressure on politicians or administrations to start resolving it in a halfway sane manner unless you understand the situation itself and understand the history behind it and so forth. And for politicians and diplomats themselves to understand these things and to write books and articles and talk to them and consult with them to hopefully enlarge their viewpoints so they have a microscopic view so they can hopefully engender policies that deal with the nuances of the situation rather than just the surface issues.
But isn't some of this ultimately interpretive? We did a show a few days ago about hidden borders, and one of the subjects we discussed was the Sykes-Picot Agreement after the First World War. Now, again, not me to tell you this, but in the modern Middle East, that agreement has mythical proportions. It's the ultimate manifestation of Western meddling and imperialism and perfidiousness, which is probably true. Mm-hmm. But from some people's point of view, it's more symbolic than actual. In other words, everything comes with some sort of interpretive, using a baseball metaphor, spin or other, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sykes-Picot is anathema to the ears of Arabs, along with the Balfour Declaration, Hussein McMahon correspondence. Is the great betrayal. And, if you can blame anybody for some of the, or many of the Middle East problems today, well, we can blame your guys, the British. I'm sorry.
We certainly are. You're not going to find anyone. No, I'm not going to argue with you on that.
Well, we're trying to take the crown from you right now in the United States in many ways and have been trying to do so. But all of these things are important, and the history of all of that is very recent to many people in the Middle East. And so, you have to understand these things, understand their angst and anger and disappointment and what they want out of life. And I think, Americans need to learn much more about the region, and through books like this and a podcast like this, where you get to speak actually for more than 5 minutes about a subject.
Catherine, you're the biographer. So tell us, it sounds to me like the best story in the book is the best episode in the book is when Bashar al-Assad almost, I don't know if he personally, but tried to poison David. What happened there? Why is this one of the, if they make a movie or a TV series out of it, I'm sure this will be the episode that we see on television.
It's definitely an exciting chapter, for sure. It puts David in this beautiful setting in Damascus. He's there. He's been writing a biography, the only authorized biography of Bashar al-Assad by a Westerner, which he published in 2025.
This was authorized by the Assads themselves?
Yes. The short story is that he had asked quite a while ago to write this, recognizing that this new president, this young president, who had been an eye surgeon in England, studying to be an eye surgeon, and was suddenly tapped to be the new heir apparent when his older brother died, when Hafez al-Assad's oldest son died.
In a car crash, right?
In a car crash early on a January morning, tapped the younger brother in London, studying to be an eye doctor, studying to be an eye surgeon. And he came home to Syria, knowing that when his father passed away, which was only a few years later, actually.
And his father, of course, was a tyrant and a mass murderer.
Yes, and for more than 30 years. And of course, his regime was terrible. So when Bashar was first made president, which happened very quickly, at an age that they changed the law so that he could become the president, everybody's hope, the great hope in the West, was that this man was going to be different in Syria. And there was hope. People called him the great reformer. And in those hope for the great
particularly his own PR people, right?
Well, yes, but plenty of people in the United States, plenty of international diplomats had this hope that this man who'd been in London. And so David had the very brilliant idea of the fact that that was a great story. And he contacted the ambassador to the United States from Syria and pitched the idea that maybe he could write a book about Bashar al-Assad. Some years went by. I'm making the story shorter. And suddenly he learned while teaching at Trinity University that his idea had been accepted. He was invited to Damascus to write a biography about Bashar al-Assad, the new lion. As we know, Assad means lion in Arabic, the new lion of Damascus. So he went to Syria. And for the next couple of years, the relationship was very interesting. He produced a fascinating book, which is available on Amazon and any places you get your book. And he thought in a way that Bashar was certainly a respected colleague. And then things began to change, as we all know. Bashar began to follow more in the ways of his father. So it was a few years later that David was back in Syria, actually trying to arrange for an important visit by President Jimmy Carter at the time, when he was poisoned. By this time, David had written things in the New York Times and other places that had discovered that indeed Bashar al-Assad was not the new hope for Syria. Is that fair for a short version, David? Very short.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's important. Bashar al-Assad didn't personally do it, I think, but his intelligence services did.
Well, but David, let me ask you on this. It's a good story, but why would you want to write a biography of the son of Hafez al-Assad, the mass murderer, someone who gassed a town, a tiny minority, an Alawite minority in Syria? Why would you even pursue that, even if there was some hope? I guess at one point, Bashar al-Assad was the kind of MBS of Syria, but a lot of people were, right from the beginning, enormously skeptical of this fellow.
Yeah, I mean, he hadn't done all that yet.
But his father had. I mean, what's the story about Homs? How many tens of thousands of people were killed there?
Between 20 and 40,000 killed. And
right. So why would you want to write a biography of this tyrant's son who takes over power from him?
Well, two reasons. One, he was, considered to be a reformer, a westernizer. And the book came out in 2005, before a lot of the atrocities in which he was engaged. The second thing, he had a non-traditional path toward the presidency, which I was interested in. I mean, it kind of like my life, where I had to pivot from being an athletic baseball to academia. He pivoted from being an eye doctor to the president of a country, an authoritarian president, an authoritarian system. And so I was very interested in that transition and interested in what he would do. And at the end of that book, I say that the last thing that Syria needs is another Hafez al-Assad. And unfortunately, that's what they got, because rather than changing the system, Bashar al-Assad assimilated into this authoritarian system and became very much like his father.
Yeah, it's interesting that we did a show recently. You probably know her work, Karen House, who's written a biography of MBS.
Yeah.
It wasn't an authorized biography, so it's a slightly different narrative. Although one of the things about the Middle East is it does seem as if history repeats itself endlessly, doesn't it? I wonder, in terms of in terms of Bashar al-Assad, I mean, you talk about this pivot. His life is, I guess, the reverse of yours. He never did pivot, did he?
I think he did. I think, and again, there were those that do not agree with me, and that's fine. I think he really did want to change Syria when he came into power. He implemented a number of policies to try to reverse things, open up the country, release political prisoners, etc. But he ran against the old guard, the people of his father's time that weren't going to let him do that, because if he was successful, they would undermine their own power positions. And so basically the thugs kept him and constrained him from doing what he wanted to do until he realized that, well, that's the only way I can rule. I mean, the old cliche, absolute power corrupts absolutely, is a cliche for a reason, because it happens. And I saw over the years, until 2009, 2010, him become much more comfortable with power, with being an authoritarian power, and believing the sycophants around them, believing the press around them, that he was a savior of the country, and that his well-being was synonymous with the country's well-being.
From an American point of view, it has always struck me that the Arab Spring, it may not have begun, but it died in Damascus with Assad's refusal to leave office after some partial success in Egypt. Do you think there's some truth to that when the full story of the Arab Spring is told, it was Assad's decision to essentially militarize the country and imprison or murder demonstrators that killed the Arab Spring?
Well, the Arab Spring was killed in each and every country in which it arose, based on the set of circumstances within those.
It seems as if the heart of the matter was Syria.
Yeah, I mean, that was the most certainly spectacular, and this is why I interviewed many of the revolutionaries in Syria during the civil war, and many of them said, once Mubarak fell in Egypt and Ben Ali fell in Tunisia and Gaddafi fell, we thought that Assad would be the next domino. And I remember saying early on, he's going to be the toughest nut to crack because of the solidity of the people around him in the security and military apparatus. And that proved to be true. But these revolutionaries, the barrier of fear was broken. And so what they found is that they didn't get the help from the West that they thought, that the country's opposition didn't solidify or cohere as well as they wanted to, and that the Syrian regime was stronger and more solidified than they had figured as well.
Yeah, maybe the US doesn't get its B+ in terms of the Middle East. Catherine, there's always politics when it comes to writing about the Middle East, which you've done in your own way, in an indirect way. David is a diplomat. He's worked with the UN, the US State Department, the current state of America. I don't want to turn it into another Trump conversation. But America currently doesn't seem, at least the people running the country at the moment, don't seem to have much value for guys like David. Is there a polemical bite to this narrative? Is there are you suggesting in a way that America needs its David Lesches?
That's a great question.
In the tail, so to speak, a scorpion in the desert.
Personally, I think the answer to that is yes. But more importantly, the people I interviewed for the book, people like William Ury, people like Harab Alian, former director of conflict resolution at the Carter Center, these wonderful human beings that are right there in the midst of it, believe that David is the kind of person we need. And I think that their stories, which are woven throughout the book, of the way David operates, the way David listens, and the skill to listening. The book is actually dedicated to the heroes who listen with open minds and open hearts. That would be David Lesch. That's not some other people that we may know politically. And so I think the answer to your question is yes, the world needs people like David Lesch.
David, let's end with you. America, as you know, isn't particularly popular these days in the Middle East, not everywhere, but certainly much of the Middle East, especially outside Israel. Do you think ultimately for America to raise its average above maybe batting 100 or 150 above the Mendoza line, for those people who know anything about baseball, it has to make more of an effort to fairly address the core problem of Israel and Palestine?
Absolutely. I mean, this has been a core problem, and what the situation in Gaza since October 7, 2023 made everyone realize is that it's still a major issue. It's it's one of the reasons why Hamas carried out those horrible attacks on October 7th, was basically a flag saying, hey, we're still here. You know, this is still an issue because Israel was normalizing relations with other Arab countries outside of the Palestinian issue. And what this whole situation has generated is that, oh, well, let's go back to the way it used to be. This whole situation, the whole Arab-Israeli conflict, is probably not going to be resolved or settled with an overall comprehensive peace agreement until this core issue is addressed. And so the United States has to take the lead in that, because the U.S. is the only country that can pressure Israel. The Arabs want the U.S. to become involved because they know we're the only country that can convince Israel to make the necessary concessions. And everyone's got to be in the same page. It's a political will, it's political leadership, and you have to have it in Washington, you have to have it in Jerusalem, you have to have it in Ramallah, and you have to have it in places like Riyadh and Amman and Cairo and other places. And they've got to be in the same page. It happens very rarely, but yet the U.S. has the ability and the authority and the power to help generate this consensus to get things settled in the region once and for all.
Well, there you have it, on the same page. And if you really want to find something on the same page, it's David Lesch on the cover and in all the pages of Catherine Nixon Cooke's intriguing new biography, Dodgers to Damascus, David Lesch's journey from baseball to the Middle East. A wonderful conversation, both of you. Thank you so much, both the biographer and the subject of Dodgers to Damascus. Keep well, keep safe. And David, in particular, I think I'd love to get you back on the show to talk more Middle Eastern stuff, because it's an endlessly tragic and necessary conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Would love to.
Thanks, Andrew.